We're going to get started in about 10 seconds. Thank you. Welcome back to Three Thoughts On. We're here. Everyone that's, of course, online, thank you for being here, and everybody that is here in person, thank you so much for being here. Today I have a special guest, Jay Groves. Jay, how are you doing?
Doing great, Rafael. Thank you. It's good to be here. Good to be back in Lake Nona.
Excellent. Well, you didn't go very far. So,
for sure.
Let's start by giving the audience a little bit of background, because for sure you're doing something very different than what you were doing. We met 6 years ago when I moved to Lake Nona.
Yeah.
So give us a little bit of a story of what are you doing and how did you navigate into doing this that you're doing today?
Well, thank you for the question. So right now I serve as the executive director of the Culinary Health Institute at Four Roots Farm. Four Roots Farm is an urban farm about 2 miles from downtown Orlando, and we are working hard to educate our community about the relationship between the health of our soil, the food we consume, and our health outcomes. But it's been kind of an interesting journey. I actually came to Orlando to be a part of the Lake Nona community, and specifically the Lake Nona Performance Club. And it's good to look out here in the audience and see some dear friends, some folks that have continued to be a part of my life and support me kind of no matter where I go and what I do. But when I transitioned out of the Lake Nona Performance Club, I had to deal with some family health issues, parents and daughter that was struggling with some various personal issues, and spent a couple of months doing that. And then thought I wanted to be a consultant and really kind of travel and just work on my own terms. But I heard about this project called Four Roots from some colleagues of mine that were a part of Advent Health. And Advent Health is, in fact, one of the core partners of the Culinary Health Institute. And I had an opportunity to meet the CEO and founder, a man named John Rivers, who's well known in this community. And I heard his vision and his passion for this project. And I just felt like it was the culmination of everything I ever cared about and did specifically in healthcare. And after a year on the job, it has been more than that. So I feel blessed to be there. We have a lot of exciting things ahead, and maybe we can talk more about those over the next few minutes.
Excellent. So let's just start from the top. What is Four Roots? What do you do as a company? I know people can go to the website. It's fourrootsfarms.org, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
And there are a number of verticals that you can see from within the website on different things and different programs that you guys do.
Yeah.
Why don't we go through that so that we can get people acquainted with the model?
Sure. So when John Rivers decided to start this company called Four Roots, he'd had a tremendous amount of success in the healthcare industry, particularly the pharmacy benefit management side. Transitioned out of healthcare, then became a very successful restaurant owner and developer. But he always knew he wanted to, first of all, create some resources to address food insecurity and hunger, and there's plenty of that in Orlando. But ultimately, he wanted to create a place where people could come, grow food, and learn about the relationship between soil, food that we consume, and our health and health outcomes. A very experiential environment. So in 2015, John and his wife Monica launched Four Roots, and it was primarily about, I'd say, education at that point, working with local high schools to revitalize their ag science programs or their greenhouses. And then John got very interested during the pandemic in creating resources to address hunger and food insecurity. But he always wanted to create a physical place where individuals could come and share this common bond about our understanding of food as medicine. So where is that place? And John had a vision that it might be north of Orlando, but as he's going around the city telling people about this vision, the folks at the Dr. Phillips Foundation heard about it, and they were in the process of developing the packing district. Many people in this room and listening may be very much aware of the packing district, one of the most rapidly growing and innovative communities, but it's very much got a health and wellness focus. So they had about a 40-acre piece of that property, of the 210 acres, that had been zoned as a floodplain. And once they heard about John's vision and his desire to create a farm in urban Orlando that particularly was about addressing food insecurity and food deserts, they gave us the property. So about 4 or 5 years ago, John started with the team to build out the campus. And if you came to the campus now, what you would find is a 18,000 square foot greenhouse with 9 different growing systems. And you can, those of you that are watching are able to see exactly where the campus is located. So we've got this massive greenhouse where we're able to grow lots of different produce in lots of different growing systems. We have an education building that we're using. We host a lot of Valencia College ag science classes. This summer we're partnering with the Orlando Science Center, and their 3rd through 5th grade summer camps are at the farm campus. And we're teaching them about ag science. We're teaching the kids about culinary medicine. They're learning to make smoothies and really being introduced to plant-forward nutrition. And so lots of educational expressions happening there, including a partnership with the UCF College of Medicine. And also our multiple external outdoor growing fields. So we're growing lots of food. What do we do with that food? Some of it we use in our own CSA. So we have a community-sourced agriculture program where we can bring the farmer's market to your front door. So now a lot of that produce that we're bringing to individuals comes from our farm campus. And then we have a program called Meet the Need, and it's a produce distribution program where we provide Second Harvest, Salvation Army, these community-based organizations that are really in the trenches working with folks who are dealing with food insecurity. Sometimes they are challenged to identify produce, and we're able to bring produce to those individuals. So when we talk about the campus, the 4 roots stand for education, health and well-being, sustainability, and then economic development. Once the campus is fully built out, and we're about halfway there, we'll have a large farm-to-table restaurant. We'll have a farmer's market that'll be open 7 days a week, and we'll have an event center where we'll host weddings, corporate events. Our vision is with this entire expression of the campus that we will be profitable to the point where one day we can be a grant-giving institution. So to sum it all up, we've created this campus because we believe in the power of food to help build healthier communities.
Wow, fantastic. And you do actually one more thing, because you also do some composting.
We do, absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So we have a great partner on the composting side called O-Town Compost. I think O-Town actually serves the Lake Nona community, but they provide both commercial and residential composting services. So for a small fee, twice a month, they'll come to your house and give you a 5-gallon bucket that you then fill up with your food waste, and they come pick it back up, and then they take that to a farm, a local farm, where the process of composting happens, and then twice a year they'll bring back essentially some compost that you can use for your garden, your yard, etc. And so I believe they've got about 800 residents that are customers of O-Town, and many different corporations. So that's already in place, that's already happening, and they are also servicing our campus as well.
Wonderful. So let's go back to this topic. I love that finally we have people really tackling this issue of food insecurity as you described. And at least, and I want you to keep me honest here, so just correct me if I go if I say anything incorrect. But when we talk about food insecurity, there's a number of things that play into that, right? One of them is, of course, education, right? Meaning, when people not really knowing what is good for them, or not knowing the source of what they're eating. They may think what the choices they're making are good, but they may really not know because the source is unknown. Okay. There's also availability, right? In certain neighborhoods may not have the quality of food available. And there's been this stigma for many, many years. I remember that soda and chips are actually cheaper than produce, which we know is not the case. We know that we can do better, but still there is that mentality, right? And if you walk into a place and 90% of what your choices are pre-processed, that's a problem, right? So it's availability, it's the economics of it. you guys see it that way as well, and that's part of the effort that you're putting into solving the problem?
Absolutely. When you talk about food as medicine, you have to first start with the issue of hunger and food insecurity. Because one of the things we know definitively, if you are living in a food insecure home, your health costs will be about $2,000 a year higher than individuals that have access to plenty of food, even if it's the wrong food. Now, it's interesting when you talk about this concept of food insecurity. Hunger, people understand, missing meals, and most of us have probably never been in that situation. But food insecurity, the statistics show nationally that about 10% of Americans are food insecure. They've got some food and some money, but they're not quite sure if it's enough to provide for today, this week, or the rest of the month. Now, many of us have had a recent experience with food insecurity. Think back to the pandemic, particularly early on when grocery stores maybe weren't open, or when you were able to go into a grocery store and the food you needed or your family preferred wasn't there. The shelves were empty, possibly, particularly if you needed baby formula. There were moments where all of us were a little bit uncertain, insecure about our food. Imagine living like that. Now, we were food insecure. We had the financial resources, but the supply chain let us down. The reverse is food insecurity when there's plenty of food around you, but you literally can't afford it. So about 10% of Americans live like that every day. Am I going to have enough money to get through the week, the month? How am I going to feed my kids in the summer when they're not able to access school lunch programs? These are the complexities that about 10% of Americans face. But in certain segments, the numbers are even more staggering. We recently had a great visit from the executive leadership team of the Orlando VA. Mr. Tim Cook and his team came over, and Tim educated us that about 30% of veterans are food insecure. Wow. And a high percentage of college students and even medical students are food insecure. So yes, it is where you have to start as far as this equation is concerned. And really, we like to talk about addressing it in 3 steps: access, education, and inspiration. So we have resources. We have a mobile farmers market. This Saturday, if you want to come out to the farm, we're hosting the community farmers market from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. and would love to show you the farm campus. I'll be there and be happy to give you a tour. But we have a market, that mobile market, that comes to Lake Nona and other more affluent communities, but we go to the Salvation Army. We go to other parts of Orlando that struggle to access fresh produce, and that's all we sell at our farmers market and our mobile farmers market. And we take SNAP cards, and we're Fresh Bucks eligible, which means if you have a SNAP card and you purchase fresh fruits and vegetables, the value of that card is double. So access and then education, exactly what you said, is helping people understand the benefits of plant-forward nutrition, and particularly since the pandemic, the price of eating healthy is no more than the price of eating unhealthy. And then lastly is inspiration. The choices that we make around food are so complex. Some of them are sociological, upbringing, our emotions, etc. But many people, they don't think about getting into the kitchen and being inspired. So that's where the Culinary Health Institute comes to play. We get people in the kitchen, teach them how to use a blender again, to make smoothies in a nutritional way, to get their families in the kitchen together. So you certainly have to address it, and we think all 3 elements, access, education, and inspiration, are equally important in that process.
That's wonderful. Do you think, so I want to get into the topic of technology, because I'm very curious about the greenhouse that you mentioned. But before we jump into that, it's at least in my mind, it makes sense when we talk about everything you're saying makes perfect sense. There's some of us who are fortunate enough to be able to have the means and the opportunity, financial means and the opportunity to actually pick and choose, what we eat. And then there's many others, who don't. But then you have the opposite side of that spectrum, whereas how much food we actually waste.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And as a country, as a community, And I grew up in the 70s in a third world country where we would tell you have to clean your plate because there's some kid in some other country
Yep.
who doesn't, who doesn't have what you have, right? And we know that all comes with all kinds of different problems, but is part of your education program also talk about what to consume and how much to consume?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, it's kind of schizophrenic. I mean, the issue of food waste. So every day America produces enough calories, enough food for every person in this country to have 3,000 calories a day.
Wow.
We only need about 2,000, and then 40% of our food gets thrown away. So we have a major problem with food distribution. Now, I grew up on a cattle farm in southern Missouri, almost right on the Arkansas line. My grandfather, he farmed beef cattle, and we lived on his farm for 6 years, and we moved to Kansas City. But every summer I would go down there and live with my grandfather, haul hay. But my grandmother was a cook at the local hospital. And she had about a 2-acre garden on that campus, on their property. So when you see firsthand how hard it is to produce food, 90% of the food we consumed came from that farm. Wasting it was untenable because there was a very visual experience that you had watching your grandfather get up at 5 in the morning, all the things he had to do to take care of his cattle, your grandmother doing her thing. And so this whole concept of you eat every bite on your plate because somebody in some country is doing without. I think we've lost that concept. And so for us, the purchase of food and the consumption of food is so far apart from where it's grown, we've lost our appreciation for the complexities of food production and the sacrifices that are paid by the farm industry. So we discard food as if it was really meaningless to us. So part of what we do is education. We have a K through 12 education program where we talk to children through summer camps, through our partnerships with the Boys and Girls Club, so many different community-based organizations that we partner with. We're not the first in this space, and we know that. And so that's certainly true on the educational side. And so we talk to kids about plant-based nutrition. Where does produce come from? Many kids have no idea beyond Walmart, Publix, Aldi's, etc. So get a student out on the farm, let them pick a carrot, clean the carrot, and then we show them a creative thing. Or you pick the produce, it doesn't matter. That whole concept can be eye-opening to these kids for the first time. All right, where did that soil come from? Where is that soil? What are the things that make soil more or less nutritious? What role do I play in that? So for many of us, the production of food is completely separate from the way we consume food, and that includes food waste. So we talk a lot about food waste in our educational programming, our culinary program. We actually talk to our participants about how to minimize food waste in the kitchen, how to use food scraps, things you might normally throw out to add to a salad, or an omelet, or things of that nature. But I think all of us could probably stand to be a little bit more aware of food waste and the impact of our own behaviors on that issue.
Do you talk to these kids about, there's a window where, and please again, call me out, educate me on this, but it makes a difference at what point in the growth process of the produce you actually pick it off. Where if you pick it up too early, or it's too green, that it may not have the same nutritional value as if you pick it at the right time, or if it's too ripe. Is that part also of the education program for some of these kids?
Yeah, it is. So our farm campus, we talked about the greenhouse, and our greenhouse has all these multiple growing systems, and it's a lot about production. We're trying to grow a lot of food for the various uses that I previously described. But outside, behind our education center, is what we call our permaculture forest. And it doesn't look very foresty right now. It got flooded with Hurricane Milton, and we had to start our growing all over again. But the idea is basically you go out into the permaculture forest and the things that we're growing are labeled. There's 127 different forms of produce there. You're able to, eventually you'll be able to scan a QR code, learn about the produce, when to pick it, when to grow it, what are the ideal growing seasons as well. So yes, that is a part of the educational process. Now I'm talking a little bit out of my league right now because I'm not a part of the education team. I can talk about the medical side all day, but we've seen some pretty profound things with kids. And I'll just give you one example, and John Rivers tells this story way better than I do, but early on when Four Roots was really about addressing education, John was able to access some produce and provide it free to a local school, to the parents. So that we'd bring the produce to the school, the kids would take it home. And so we asked the teachers to help us understand how was the produce being used. And so a lot of the kids would talk about, hey, we made this or we tried this recipe. And then one little girl said, well, every time I bring the produce home, my mom throws it out. She just puts it in the trash, and couldn't understand that. It was $25, $30 worth of produce every week. That's a lot to most of us. And at a parent-teacher conference, the teacher just couldn't help herself, and she asked the mom, you know, we're trying to provide you with food. We hear from your daughter, you're throwing this out. Is there a problem? And she said, my daughter told me that this food comes from the dirt, and I don't feed my kids dirty food. Now, that's telling, right? It's not her fault. She didn't know. She didn't understand. We're so many generations removed from people living in an agrarian society that most of us never think about where that food comes from. So from our perspective, the earlier you start to educate kids, the better. So when they get to be parents, not only do they know where it comes from, they're able to grow it in their own home and provide the most nutritious options they can for their own children.
That's a wonderful story. Tell me about this greenhouse. You've mentioned this a couple of times, that there's a number of different growing technologies.
Yeah.
Safe to assume that we're talking about like hydroponics, or is it something completely different?
No, I think you're right on there. We have multiple forms of hydroponics. So hydroponics is when you grow the produce or the plant directly in water. There's no soil involved. And then you typically fertilize that plant with a waste from an animal. So we have 400 tilapia fish in a couple of tanks in our greenhouse, and we use their waste, we filter it, and we feed it back to our plants. So hydroponics, and then aquaponics is the process of using, just pure animal waste in the growth process in a hydroponic system. We also have vertical growing towers. I was talking to Jared, just before we started this session. Essentially every day we're losing productive farmable soil in this country by dozens of football fields due to soil runoff, overproduction, overuse of the soil, etc. So we're having to find some new growing systems, vertical growing systems. They're not necessarily economical right now, but they're showing a lot of promise. So we have vertical growing systems as well. And then we have some soil-based growing systems. So why do we have multiple growing systems? Ultimately, once we have our campus completely built out, we're going to have a medical clinic on the campus. It's a partnership with Florida Blue, Advent Health, and Gordon Food Service. And in that clinic will be a phytonutrient lab. And from that lab, we'll be able to measure the macro and micro nutrient value of the food that we grow. So if food is medicine, you need to know what's in the food, and we'll be able to do that. So if we're trying to increase lycopene levels in a tomato because it's been shown to reduce the risk of prostate cancer, we want to know, is it hydroponics, aquaponics? Is there a certain form of waste that leads to a higher nutritional product? And then we want to provide that in various forms to individuals who need it. So we have multiple growing systems so that eventually we can test out some of these concepts. And then with these growing systems, some are better for tomatoes, some are better for greens, and we're able to test and experiment with all that. Again, I'm talking outside of my scope of practice a little bit. Fortunately, we've got a brilliant farm team that oversees all of this. But the idea with the campus is we have multiple ways to organically manipulate the soil, multiple growing systems, and then the ability to measure what we grow so that we can provide it in ways where it truly is medicinal for those that receive it.
That's wonderful. So let me throw something at you, and you can tell me if I'm insane or not. I have this crazy dream. I have had it for a couple of years now. I have a friend who was deep into this hydroponics with the fish, and everything, and he had a couple of these systems in his house, and I found it fascinating. And it reminded me, of course, Epcot Center has been doing something along those lines for as long as they've been around, right? So I had this idea, and I'm not taking any credit, I'm sure it's been around, but I want to get your thoughts on it, of getting to a place where I can go to a farmer in the Midwest who has N numbers of acres of land that they're farming, and bring them with a model that says, if you take 10% of your land and you verticalize it into one corner of your land, you can produce 90% of what you produce in that land, and now you can reuse that land.
Yeah.
You can maybe work with the municipalities to make it into a state park,
Yeah.
and rent it out to the local or federal government, or maybe for cattle, or just
Yeah.
use it in a different way that is not being depleted, because the agrarian society depletes the soil, and the soil needs to be replenished, right? And in my mind, that it was a 90-10, take 10%, and that 10%, if you verticalize it enough, you'll be able to produce 90%, and then now you'll be able to make money in a different way with the rest of the land. How far away are we from that?
Oh, I don't think we're far away at all, and I love your ratio of 90 to 10%. I think you're talking about kind of this concept of regenerative farming practices. So, how do we grow food so that we can replenish the soil with more carbon levels and nutrient levels than when we began to grow? So once we harvest, the soil's in better shape than when we left it. And so typically regenerative farming practices are things like minimal tilling, because you till deeply, you lose a lot of carbon. That's important for the soil, and a lot of other nutrients as well. Cover crops, so that the soil is always covered in something, a productive grass of some type, where there's bacteria, nitrogen, good things happening there. But these vertical growing systems, I think, if we can figure out additional cost investment, how to optimize it, how to address it in multiple weather situations, what type of UV lights are better than others. I think it has great potential. I don't think we'll ever get rid of these industrialized farms. It's not going to be too far down the road that we're going to have to feed 10 billion people around the world, and you can't just do it with just 100% regenerative farming practices. That could potentially even increase the carbon footprint overall. But that 10%, can you ask a farmer to take a small portion of what they're doing and turn it into something that's more environmentally friendly and regenerative? I think that's very possible. And I think many would listen to you, and many are already beginning to adopt some of those practices.
That's wonderful. I can't wait. So there's something else that caught my eye when I was, we were going back and forth, planning for you to be here, and I was looking at the website and all that. And there was the concept of seasonality. So human beings, we're an interesting species. We've decided, unlike any other species on Earth, that we can just eat anything. We just eat everything. A cow eats grass. When? Its entire life, right? And all the other animals, they eat a very small spectrum of things, whereas we invented the term omnivore to justify our existence, right? So that we felt somehow normal that we can eat whatever we want and whenever we want. But that's not how our physiology is built. No. Evolution is a thing, and we're not built to eat certain fruits year around. Otherwise, they will grow year around. You know, we need glucose for our brain to work, and that glucose comes from these fruits. But these fruits, in the plains of Africa, where we all come from, you know, 300, 400,000 years ago, they grew at different times in different places.
Yeah.
And the hunter-gatherers were able to move around and then benefit from those fruits. I'm assuming that that's part of the program because I see on the website talk about seasonality, but I bet that's somewhat difficult to teach.
Well,
we don't want to be told what to eat and when.
no, we want it all, and we want it right now. So we want strawberries year round. It doesn't care. We don't care where they're grown, even if they're shipped in 1,500 miles, like many of them are. So I think we have to change, you know, our practices and food desires just a little bit. But that seasonality is not only what we need, it's what the earth needs. And we describe it as kind of getting back to creation, the way God intended food to grow and us to the patterns of food consumption that were originally here. And we just need to get back to that. If we can just kind of rediscover that, then I think there's lots of benefits around that. So we try to grow seasonally on the farm what would be appropriate and what you would expect. And our 9 growing systems allow us to do that. So right now it's just too hot outside, you know, to grow certain things, so we don't even try. But I think our human bodies need that variety in order to achieve optimal nutrition. But we are so spoiled because pretty much year round we can go to the local grocery store and get what we want or have it delivered to our front door. You know, and we don't think about it in those terms. The average American, I would say 95% of Americans never think about seasonality concept in relationship to their food consumption.
Now, one of the things that caught my eye right away was, for whatever reason, and this is just my ignorance, I saw, you know, Four Roots Farm, and I immediately assumed it was all plants. But you do actually more than plants. I mean, you do dairy as well, and you do meats as well?
Well, through the CSA, so through our community-sourced agriculture, everything that you can purchase through there, and we can deliver within a 50-mile radius, is sourced in the state of Florida, and it's organic. But you can get eggs, you can get raw milk, and you can get protein if that's what you want. Mm-hmm. But on the farm campus, we are pretty much all produce. Might be a few exceptions to that. We've got a couple of pigs on the campus now, and they are doing their thing in one of our regenerative fields where we've got cover crops, and we let the pigs fertilize that soil, mix it in with the cover crops, and come the fall, we'll be growing food there. It could be, don't know for sure, it could be when the pigs reach a certain maturity, they may be harvested. We have also talked about harvesting the tilapia, if we can find people that will eat the tilapia. But for the most part, we are about plant-based nutrition. Now, we don't, aggressively teach people you got to be a vegan in order to find health and well-being. We don't necessarily believe that. But what we try to say is, look, let's lead with plant-forward nutrition. If we can all get 30 to 35 servings of fruits and vegetables in our diet every week, then I probably don't care too much about what else you're eating. You're going to get adequate nutrition, you're going to get plenty of fiber, and there's going to be much balance in your diet. But unfortunately, the average American at best gets half of that. So then it's important that we find that nutrition, elsewhere through supplements and other things that might be available to us. But plant-forward nutrition is really what we emphasize. Our chief medical officer at the Culinary Health Institute is an incredible, brilliant local cardiologist. Her name is Monica Agarwal, and she's a preventive cardiologist. So her specialty is teaching patients with cardiovascular disease who are medically stable to manage their blood lipids without ever going on statins, to manage their blood pressure without hypertensive agents. Because we know that for most of us, it's very much possible. We typically accomplish that with plant-based nutrition.
That's fantastic. So let me ask you a question. So when I met you, you were here doing the performance club, and you have a illustrious career where you did so many places like that all over the country. And then you walk out of that and you go into this beautiful setting. When you walked in, what was the one thing that struck you that you had no idea was going on in that world? That was just so surprising. It's like, wow, I had no idea that you can do this in this space.
Yeah. Well, I have been so blessed in my life. I had a 30-year career at Vanderbilt Medical Center and started out in rehabilitation medicine, then got into lifestyle medicine and integrative medicine. And I can't remember one day at Vanderbilt where in any department I was a part of, we didn't have a dietitian. We always focused on nutrition. And at the time, some of the most progressive physicians who understood lifestyle medicine were on the Vanderbilt campus. In fact, my chief medical officer at Vanderbilt is now the chair of preventive medicine at Stanford and oversees some of the most meaningful nutritional research that happens in the United States. And we had one of the first teaching kitchens in America in 1989. We were taking our patients post-heart attack and heart transplant into the kitchen, and we were teaching them how to prepare food with a dietitian and a physician who was not necessarily trained in culinary skills. We kind of didn't know about that, but was motivated to be with their patients in that learning environment. And then I was able to go to New Jersey and experience similar kinds of things. Physicians, Hackensack Medical Center had a wellness center that had a teaching kitchen, and they were one of the first teaching kitchens in America to be certified through the Teaching Kitchen Collaborative. And even down here at Lake Nona, we had every intention of having a teaching kitchen a part of that facility, and I was so excited about it. But as many of you know the story, we built the facility right at the start of the pandemic. And so we had to value engineer a lot of the pieces out of it just to make it work economically, but there was always a vision to do that. So to answer your question, I always understood about the importance of nutrition in terms of health and health outcomes in lifestyle medicine. And so I took this position knowing that that was a priority with the Culinary Health Institute. But what I didn't know was how deeply committed and ingrained Four Roots was to addressing hunger and food insecurity in this community. That really resonated with me and kind of probably sealed the deal in terms of me deciding to take this position. And that got me back to my roots, if you will. Spent a lot of time doing prison ministry and working with people that have a lot of struggles that many of us, kind of take for granted. And so that service part of my life, I'm now able to incorporate into the professional side of my life. So that was surprise number one. Surprise number two was just the brilliance of John Rivers and how innovative he is, and how he's able to see connections, and he has a vision for things well beyond most people that I've ever met or known. So his belief that you can create an urban farm where you can teach, educate, and do research about this concept of food as medicine in a way that empowers the community, that totally sealed the deal for me. So I would say those two things: the fact that Four Roots and the farm campus is not just about, creating this exclusive, concierge experience. We are a campus for our entire community. We are located in one of the poorest zip codes in all of Orlando. And at our farmers market Saturday, you will see that. We started doing this really cool event every month. Get excited about it because it's pretty powerful to be there. It's a plant-based community potluck. And it's happening next Thursday if you want to come. Here's the price of admission. You bring a plant-based dish and a recipe and an open heart. And we just come together, we sit around the table, and we teach each other about plant-based nutrition. And we've been doing this every month since May, and we've had about 35 to 40 people come, and those folks represent our community. So that piece is hugely important. And then having a leader like John who is collaborative and innovative and understands kind of the mission behind what we do, and that's what drives him and us. Couldn't say no to that.
That's fantastic. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because as you were telling me this, I couldn't help but to kind of put together this conversation with the conversation which I just had right before you, talking about mental health. And one thing that maybe you're already addressing this in your education classes to the kids, but a healthy gut biome is responsible for hormone distribution. in our bodies. If we have a regulated gut biome and that is properly cared for with the proper foods and the pre, pro, and postbiotics, our body regulates hormones in a much better way, and we end up in not having as many moods and not having as many of these issues that end up creating, problems for us in our society. So the fact that it's like you say, the food has to be the medicine, it actually goes far beyond what most people think.
Oh, could not agree more. And gosh, you're kind of reading our mind. Our cardiologist, when she talks about managing heart disease, she starts with the gut biome. Because what we know about the gut biome is if you don't nurture it properly with plant-based nutrition, that's really the key to it, then it can lead to profound changes in inflammation, which can affect your heart, your vascular system, pretty much every solid organ, and certainly our brain. And so that's a concept that's kind of new to folks, and kind of what does that even mean? Is that something I really want to talk about, understand? What about prebiotics, probiotics? There's lots of hearsay and controversy around this, but we know that you can measure the quality of the gut biome. The bacteria in our gut, we want it there. We want it doing good things, metabolizing food in a way that optimizes our cells. And you can measure when that's happening. And we know definitively through just well-done research that high intake of meat leads to a poorly compromised gut biome. But within a few weeks of a predominant plant-based diet, you can reverse many of those gut biome biomarkers in a favorable way. So it's hugely important. And it doesn't just affect our physical health, it certainly affects our mood, which drives a lot of our eating behaviors, and our emotional health and well-being. So it's all very much related. In fact, Dr. Agarwal wrote a book about her own personal experience with an autoimmune disease, and the book is called Body on Fire. And don't need to steal her thunder, but it's a powerful story about a physician with 2 young kids who was not spending a lot of time taking care of her own body and ended up with an autoimmune disorder that almost ended her career in healthcare and compromised her health dramatically. And she completely reversed all that by plant-based nutrition. So it's a powerful story. Many people have lived it, maybe not to that degree, but it's real.
Oh, I fully agree. I mean, it's real for me too. I mean, I was diagnosed with heart disease back in 2010, and I was told I needed to take statins forever, and I refused. So I changed my life. I changed my lifestyle. I changed the way that I ate. I became what you would call a part-time vegan. So I would eat meat maybe 2 to 3 times a week, and the rest of the time it was just plant-based. Mainly because my body needed the protein at the time, and it changed everything. And now I have my cardiologist tells me that I'm fine. I probably need to do a little bit more. I probably need to go see your doctor and see if because this was all self-prescribed, which is not recommended. Okay, go see a healthcare professional. But no, I mean I felt my body changing, my sleep patterns changed.
Yeah.
I was traveling all over the world at that time, and that was very tasking. So definitely an advocate for that. I want to leave room. I knew this was going to happen. It happens every time. We start talking and you blink and the clock is looking at me. But I want to give time for questions. If anybody has any questions for Jay from the audience. Yes.
I hear a lot about alkaline diet that has to do with plant-based. Is there science that you know that kind of talks about this and taking out impurities outside of your body?
So let me just repeat the question for the audience about the alkaline diet, and do you know any kind of research along those lines and how it helps?
Yeah. I am not as experienced in the alkaline diet, but what you're talking about is exactly what we hope to do at the farm campus, is to be able to experiment and try some of these diets that have shown some promise in some settings. So favorable anecdotal stories, people trying some of these things, and then running a clinical trial to compare that to a blue zone diet, to a Mediterranean diet. So I'm not as aware of it, but it is certainly something that we would have the ability to test out on the farm campus. It's one of the blessings of having some of our partners. Advent Health, nutrition is one of the fundamental principles of the Adventist healthcare system. Florida Blue has been incredibly involved in addressing food insecurity, but they have the desire together to create an evidence-based approach to whatever we decide we want to implement as far as our clinic is concerned. So starting, it's kind of a long answer to your question, but I wish I knew more, but I'm trying to tell you what we hope to do to be able to answer questions like this. Starting July 31st, we're going to launch a pilot Culinary Health Institute clinic at the Center for Health and Wellbeing in Winter Park. And so our cardiologist, Dr. Agarwal, will be seeing patients, and then we will be, we've created a 3-month program that includes nutrition counseling, behavioral health coaching, has to be there, has to be a strong component, exercise programming through the Crosby Fitness Center, culinary experiences, and food where appropriate. So we're going to provide bags of produce, medically tailored meals, things of that nature. So we'll have the ability over time to tease out some of these really important questions about what should you eat. It's pretty incredible that in 2025, we can't necessarily answer that definitively. We know there's dietary reference index guidelines for, all right, this is generally what you should eat if you've got cancer or, cognitive deficits, things of that nature. But we can't necessarily give you a definitive plan. We need to do better, and that's part of the journey that we're going to be on.
Any other questions? One last question for you. What are you excited about for the next 5 years of what you're doing with Four Roots?
I am excited about, and we haven't talked a lot about, but some of the technology that's out there that will support patients behaviorally. What we need to do around food as medicine is have some of the same advances that we've had, let's say, with wearables for physical activity and sports performance training. So I'm excited about some of the apps that I've seen, some of the technologies that are out there that allow us with our smartphone to instantly analyze our diet and tell us where it's at in terms of the gut biome and how those things can be incorporated into a human-centered healthcare system. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I'm probably equally excited about all that's happening in Orlando, where the community-based organizations, Second Harvest, I'm going to leave some of them out, I don't mean to, but Salvation Army, Seniors First, Get Cooking, are coming together because we realize we can't do it unto ourselves. We're all coming together to integrate our resources, to secure funding, and really have an impact on food insecurity in this city. So it's kind of the balance of technology with humanity and remembering those who are less than and recognizing that we've got to do both.
Jay, this is wonderful. Your work is much needed. I'm so happy that you're doing this. Thank you for being here, for sharing the story. Thank your team out there. And John, I didn't know him. I knew from the barbecue.
Sure, yeah.
The barbecue restaurant. I know, as I was doing the research to talk to you, I was like, oh my God, that's the same person. But please thank him and his team for what you're doing. I think it's very needed, and it's going to have an immense impact. Thank you all for coming. Please give Jay a hand.
All right. Thank you, Rafael. It's been my pleasure.